All right. So what we're witnessing right now between Ukraine and Russia in the Sahel, it's moved beyond rhetoric. It's moved beyond posturing. What we're seeing is calculated, deliberate, and unmistakably aggressive. And I need to be very clear about something from the start, because this is important. This isn't Ukraine suddenly discovering Mali exists. This is Ukraine intensifying operations that were already underway, tightening the noose around Russia's presence in the Sahel and pushing the information war into absolute overdrive. So let me walk you through what's been happening over the last several days, because the sequence of events here, the coordination, it reveals everything you need to know about what's really going on. It started with a coordinated barrage of atrocity allegations. Detailed, graphic, strategically timed accusations of rape, torture, organ harvesting, mass village burnings, all allegedly carried out by Russian Africa Corps forces operating inside Mali. And Ukraine didn't just release these allegations quietly. They amplified them across multiple diplomatic channels simultaneously, while Western media platforms rolled out survivor testimonies, graphic descriptions, the full psychological warfare package. And the message, embedded in all of this, it was crystal clear. Frame Russia's Africa Corps as brutal and illegitimate. Portray Mali as another theater of Russian atrocities. Create the same moral panic that's been weaponized in Europe. Then came the escalation that genuinely grabbed global attention. A Russian-linked fuel tanker was struck off the coast of Senegal. We reported on this. The vessel was hit by what intelligence sources are now saying was a Ukrainian-operated drone. That tanker was carrying approximately 40,000 tons of fuel destined for Mali. So think about what just happened here. By targeting a commercial vessel at sea, Ukraine moved from narrative pressure to direct kinetic sabotage of a Russian supply line into Mali. This wasn't symbolic. This was operational disruption designed to strangle Mali's fuel supply. And as all of this is unfolding, as the tanker is burning in the Atlantic, Western intelligence assessments started circulating with urgent warnings. Jihadist groups are tightening pressure around Bamako. Mali is facing imminent collapse. The capital is under siege. Inside Mali, the government responded immediately. They convened communication chiefs from every single ministry, declared this moment an information war, and began preparing a unified national response. So in this episode today, we're going to break down exactly how Ukraine has intensified its sabotage operations targeting Mali, why the stakes in this confrontation are rising faster than anyone anticipated, and what this reveals about the desperate endgame of Western influence in the Sahel. Let's get into it. Here's what's happening right now on the ground. Ukraine has launched what can only be described as a coordinated assault on Mali and the broader Sahel region. And this assault, it's not designed to help. It's not designed to liberate anyone. It's designed specifically to destabilize the revolutionary governments of the Sahel and weaken their leadership. The tools they're using: accusations of atrocities that serve a very specific dual purpose. Undermine Russia's credibility internationally, while simultaneously positioning Western powers as the moral arbiters who should be controlling Africa's security architecture. Just days ago, Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a comprehensive package of allegations against Russia's Africa Corps. And these accusations, this is critically important, they were carefully timed to create maximum diplomatic damage at a very specific moment. These weren't spontaneous revelations from concerned humanitarians. These were strategically designed claims released in perfect coordination with Western media outlets, with the explicit purpose of delegitimizing Russia's presence in Mali and pressuring Mali's government to abandon its Russian-Mali partnership. According to testimonies gathered by the Associated Press, BBC, and various international human rights organizations, Ukraine is alleging that Russian-controlled forces in Mali have committed systematic rape, torture, beheadings, mass executions, entire villages burned to the ground. Ukraine went even further, framing Mali as the African Bucha, a deliberate attempt to draw moral parallels between European suffering and African suffering, but only when that suffering serves Ukraine's geopolitical interests. Think about the cynicism embedded in that framing. African lives matter to Ukraine only when they can be weaponized against Russia. Russia, for its part, has swiftly and categorically rejected these allegations. Russian state media and diplomatic channels have dismissed the claims as staged provocations, as a Western disinformation campaign designed to shield jihadist groups from legitimate counterterrorism operations and to obscure the reality of what's actually happening in the Sahel. For Russia, this isn't about human rights concerns. This is about the West using Ukraine as a proxy to protect its eroding interests in the Sahel, to punish African countries that have chosen non-Western security partnerships. And this is where we need to be completely honest about what's actually happening here, because the framing matters. This is sabotage dressed in humanitarian language. This is geopolitical warfare, wearing the mask of moral concern. Ukraine's goal in amplifying these allegations is not to protect Malian civilians. The goal is to weaken Russia's position so that Western powers, especially France, can reassert control over the Sahel region. The Ukrainian foreign minister took to international platforms demanding arrest warrants, demanding UN investigations, essentially weaponizing international institutions to apply crushing pressure on a nation and a region that Ukraine has absolutely no direct stake in. The timing of all of this reveals the malicious intent. These accusations emerged precisely as Mali was strengthening its military partnership with Russia, precisely as the alliance of Sahel states was consolidating African sovereignty through coordinated defense and economic policies. Ukraine's message was unmistakable: abandon Russia, abandon the AES, return to France, return to Western alignment, or face international isolation, sanctions, and condemnation. But this information sabotage, as comprehensive as it was, this was only the first strike. Because within days, Ukraine escalated to something far more dangerous. Direct military attacks on civilian and commercial infrastructure that sustains not just Russia, but the entire Sahel economy. So these allegations against Russia's Africa Corps, they arrived with military precision. They flooded Western media platforms, refugee camps at the Mauritanian border, diplomatic circuits in New York and Brussels, all synchronized, all coordinated, all designed to create a crescendo of international pressure against Mali's revolutionary government and its Russian security partners. Over 30 refugees from Mali were interviewed by major news outlets around early December. The Associated Press, BBC, Reuters, all presenting remarkably consistent accounts of alleged abuses. The narratives were graphic, deliberately weaponized for maximum emotional impact. Refugees allegedly described indiscriminate killings, villages being systematically burned, even organ harvesting operations. These are stories designed to trigger the strongest possible emotional response and generate international outcry. But here's what requires critical examination, and I think this is where we need to really slow down and think carefully about what we're seeing. The timing, the coordination, the strategic purpose. These allegations surfaced exactly when Russia was transitioning from Wagner to Africa Corps, a moment when Moscow was consolidating and formalizing its operations across the Sahel. That's not coincidence. That's targeting. That's operational information warfare, designed to disrupt a strategic transition. What made these allegations powerful in the information space wasn't their veracity. What made them powerful was Ukraine's ability to weaponize targeted messaging at scale. They were released specifically to damage Russia's international legitimacy and to create domestic pressure inside Mali questioning the Russian partnership. Ukraine framed these claims using the moral equivalence of its own suffering. What Russia is doing to Mali is what Russia has done to Ukraine. But the substance was transparent. Russia is bringing destruction to the Sahel just as it brought destruction to Ukraine. The psychological goal here was straightforward: create doubt inside Mali about the Russian partnership, generate international pressure on Mali's government, isolate Mali diplomatically, force the government to question its security alignment, undermine broader African confidence in non-Western partnerships. This was information warfare with clear malicious intent, sabotage disguised as humanitarian concern. The West was attempting to use atrocity narratives to achieve what military force could no longer accomplish after the expulsion of French troops. The recolonization of the Sahel through psychological pressure and narrative domination. But narrative warfare alone has its limitations, and within 48 hours, Ukraine escalated to kinetic sabotage. Direct attacks on infrastructure that could cripple not just Russian operations in the region, but Mali's entire economic lifeline. Let me take you back to November 27, 2025. A Turkish-owned vessel named the Mirsan sat anchored off the coast of Dakar in Senegal. The ship was carrying nearly 40,000 tons of fuel. Intelligence assessments indicated this cargo was heading for Mali. But more importantly, and this is the critical thing to understand, this fuel represented the lifeblood of a nation fighting to maintain its sovereignty and operational capacity against enormous external pressure. What happened next was an act of sabotage with massive regional consequences. 4 external explosions struck the vessel in rapid succession. The hull was breached. The engine room flooded completely. The Turkish shipping company immediately halted all operations in the region, and a message was sent loud and clear to every country in the Sahel. Any supply line sustaining Mali, any commercial vessel supporting Mali's economy, will be targeted. Western intelligence officials later confirmed what had occurred. Ukrainian military drones had struck a commercial vessel operating in international waters. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't collateral damage. This was calculated, premeditated sabotage designed to disrupt Mali's fuel supplies and destabilize the entire region. Russia's reaction was furious and immediate. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson condemned the attacks as a terrorist act targeting civilian infrastructure and international commerce. Speaking from St. Petersburg, the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman warned that Ukraine was jeopardizing global navigation safety and attempting to derail any possibility of peace by expanding its terrorist methods into new regions far from the Ukrainian theater. For Russia, this was definitive proof that Ukraine is not a victim defending itself, but an aggressor willing to starve entire regions of Africa to score political points against Moscow. But the sabotage operation extended far beyond targeting Russia's operations, because the attack on the Mirsan had broader, more devastating implications for the entire Sahel. Mali relies heavily on fuel imports for electricity generation, transportation networks, agricultural machinery, civilian infrastructure, essentially everything that keeps a modern economy functioning. By targeting fuel shipments, Ukraine wasn't just attacking Russia. Ukraine was sabotaging Mali itself. It was weaponizing logistics against a country whose only crime was choosing African sovereignty over Western alignment. And the pattern here is becoming unmistakable when you look at Ukraine's operations globally. Coordinated strikes on Russian logistics in the Black Sea. Coordinated strikes on fuel shipments heading to Mali. This is a systematic campaign designed to create scarcity, to destabilize supply chains, and to manufacture conditions that will force Mali back into dependence on France and Western assistance. For Mali's government, the message was brutally clear. Choose Western alignment or face economic strangulation. For the alliance of Sahel states, the message was equally obvious. Independence has a price. Non-Western partnerships will be punished through sabotage, through sanctions, through relentless information warfare. But as the Mirsan burned in the Atlantic Ocean, as fuel poured into the sea, the narrative campaign was simultaneously reaching its boiling point back inside Mali. Just as Ukraine's sabotage of the Mirsan was dominating news cycles, Western intelligence agencies began releasing increasingly urgent warnings about Mali's supposedly imminent collapse. And the narrative they pushed was stark, alarming, deliberately designed to create panic. Jihadist groups were tightening a noose around Bamako. The capital was under effective siege. Mali was facing state failure within weeks. The United States evacuated its embassy staff and issued urgent warnings for American citizens to leave Mali immediately. The United Kingdom followed suit. France, the usual suspect in Sahel destabilization, issued similar warnings. Major Western media outlets ran catastrophic headlines. Mali becoming Africa's Afghanistan. Jihadist stronghold on Europe's doorstep. Failed state in the making. And here's the thing you need to understand. These warnings were not spontaneous intelligence assessments based on rapidly changing facts on the ground. They were coordinated messaging designed to create panic, to undermine confidence in Mali's government, and to suggest that Mali's choice of Russian partnership over French partnership had been catastrophic and was leading directly to state collapse. The implicit message was impossible to miss. Russia cannot protect you. Russia has failed you. Return to Western alignment immediately or face complete state failure. The specific claims were designed to maximize psychological impact and create self-fulfilling prophecies. Al-Qaeda's Sahel branch, JNIM, had supposedly expanded control dramatically. Fuel blockades were strangling the capital. Major highways were impassable due to jihadist control. The government could fall within weeks. And all of this, the narrative consistently suggested, was happening specifically because Russia was simultaneously incompetent and brutal, unable to provide effective security. But here's the sabotage within the sabotage, and this is really where the operation becomes genuinely diabolical. The fuel blockade claims coincided precisely with Ukraine's attack on the Mirsan fuel tanker. By targeting Mali's fuel supply directly through maritime sabotage, Ukraine was actively manufacturing the conditions, the fuel shortages, that would then be blamed on jihadist activity and Russian security incompetence. It was sabotage, compounded by propaganda, reinforced by coordinated intelligence warnings. A multidimensional operation designed to strangle Mali's economy while simultaneously destroying the government's credibility both domestically and internationally. Western intelligence agencies, Ukraine's diplomatic apparatus, and international media were all pushing identical coordinated narratives about Mali's impending collapse at precisely the same moment. This wasn't coincidental. This wasn't multiple independent actors reaching similar conclusions. This was orchestrated, synchronized psychological warfare against a country that had dared to assert African independence and reject French neo-colonial control. Yet inside Mali, the government clearly understood what was happening. They recognized this wasn't military defeat. This was narrative warfare, and Mali was not going to be defeated by coordinated lies and sabotaged fuel supplies. Mali's government recognized the assault for exactly what it was: a coordinated sabotage operation using economic pressure, information warfare, and diplomatic isolation as weapons of recolonization. Mali understood that the battle was being fought not primarily on military front lines, but in the narrative space where African sovereignty was being attacked from multiple coordinated angles simultaneously. On November 7, 2025, Mali's Ministry of Communication convened an emergency summit. Every ministry's communication officer was ordered to attend. The state broadcaster, the national news agency AMAP, the National Communication Authority, all sent high-level representatives. This wasn't a routine bureaucratic meeting. This was Mali's declaration that it recognizes the sabotage campaign and intends to fight back systematically. Mali's Minister of Communication made the government's position absolutely unmistakable. He declared that Mali was facing a genuine information war, a coordinated assault using media platforms, digital networks, and psychological tactics specifically designed to undermine the country's confidence in its own leadership and chosen partnerships. The minister called it exactly what it was: warfare conducted through narratives, disinformation, and coordinated messaging. The government's response was strategic and comprehensive. Unify all government messaging across ministries. Counter false narratives systematically with evidence. Reassert control over the national information space. Mali was essentially saying, "We see the sabotage clearly. We recognize this coordinated attack. We will not be defeated by information warfare designed to serve foreign neocolonial interests." Mali's ministry cited data showing that disinformation campaigns targeting Africa had increased fourfold between 2022 and 2024, with West Africa as the primary target region. Mali understood that the assault it was facing was part of a much broader Western strategy to regain control of the African continent through information domination when military domination was no longer politically sustainable. By unifying government communication and creating coordinated counter-messaging, Mali was fighting back against the sabotage, not with weapons, but with truth, evidence, and narrative resistance. This was an act of sovereign defense against psychological warfare designed to recolonize Africa through narrative manipulation and economic pressure rather than direct military occupation. This was 21st century statecraft at its most essential. Recognizing that information is a weapon, that narratives can destabilize countries as effectively as military invasions, and that defending against modern sabotage means defending your information space with the same intensity and resources as you defend your physical borders. While Mali was organizing its information defense, Ukraine was simultaneously escalating its diplomatic sabotage campaign at the international level. Ukraine understood that economic pressure and information warfare needed to be reinforced and amplified by institutional pressure, by weaponizing international bodies against countries that resisted Western alignment in Africa. And Ukraine's demands were comprehensive and calculated. They called for international arrest warrants against Africa Corps personnel. They demanded new sanctions regimes specifically targeting Russian operations in Mali. They insisted on UN-led fact-finding missions and independent investigations, all carefully designed to create permanent diplomatic pressure on Mali and to delegitimize the Malian government in international forums. Every diplomatic statement was meticulously crafted to weaponize international institutions against Mali's sovereignty. Ukraine was essentially delivering an ultimatum: realign with France, return to Western security partnerships, or face isolation, sanctions, arrest warrants, and international condemnation. The Ukrainian foreign minister used every available international platform to amplify this coordinated pressure campaign. The core message was designed to manipulate African decision-makers through fear. Russia brings violence, not development. Russia is exploitative, extractive, a criminal empire. African governments should categorically reject Russian partnerships or face the consequences of international isolation and institutional punishment. Russia has countered these diplomatic moves at the highest levels, at the United Nations Security Council, and through bilateral diplomatic channels across Africa. Russia has systematically accused Ukraine of acting as a Western proxy, of exporting its terrorist methods into Africa specifically to do the bidding of former colonial masters who cannot accept African independence. Russia argues that these diplomatic attacks aren't about justice or human rights or international law. They're about punishing African countries that dare to choose security and economic partners other than France and the broader Western bloc. For Ukraine, this multifaceted sabotage campaign serves two critical strategic purposes. First, it undermines Russia's global credibility and disrupts Russia's international partnerships, forcing Moscow to defend its reputation and operations on multiple fronts simultaneously. And second, perhaps even more important for France specifically, it destabilizes the alliance of Sahel states and the broader African sovereignty movement that threatens to permanently end French influence across the continent. This is France using Ukraine as a proxy to sabotage Africa's ability to chart an independent course. This is colonialism being systematically repackaged as international law, as humanitarian concern, as rules-based global order. It is sabotage wearing the sophisticated mask of moral authority and institutional legitimacy. Here's what Western media will never tell you directly, and this requires reading carefully between the lines of the broader geopolitical strategy at play. Ukraine is not acting alone in this Sahel confrontation. Ukraine is a tool, and that tool belongs ultimately to France. And when you look at the geography of this moment, when you map the simultaneous operations, it becomes even clearer what's happening. France is simultaneously consolidating new military alliances with Nigeria, establishing new bases, deepening security cooperation. This is not coincidental coordination. This is deliberate, calculated strategy. France understands it has lost direct military control in the Sahel heartland. French forces have been systematically expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. The entire alliance of Sahel states has unified under Russian and Chinese security and economic backing, explicitly rejecting Western interference and reclaiming African sovereignty over resources and decision-making. But France has not accepted defeat, at least not yet. Instead, France is playing a more sophisticated, more patient game. While Ukraine destabilizes Russia's operations in Mali through sabotage and relentless information warfare, France is strengthening its grip over Nigeria, West Africa's largest economy and most powerful military force. Nigeria has become France's new proxy in West Africa, the insurance policy against the rise and expansion of the alliance of Sahel states. The strategy is elegant and ruthlessly calculated. Use Ukraine to bleed Russia and destabilize Mali. Use Nigeria to contain the AES from expanding influence toward the coast and into ECOWAS. Keep West Africa divided along the Sahel coast axis. Keep Russia operationally bogged down. Keep the African sovereignty agenda fractured and unable to achieve continental momentum. This is the final desperate gambit of a dying colonial power. France, which once controlled the entire Sahel through ECOWAS manipulation and direct military occupation, now operates through proxies and shadows, through coordination and manipulation rather than direct force. Ukraine fires the bullets through drones and information campaigns. Nigeria holds the containment line toward the West African coast. And France sits in Paris, coordinating this containment strategy that grows more desperate with each passing month as African governments continue choosing sovereignty over servitude. But here's what France fundamentally doesn't understand. What the architects of this proxy war consistently misunderstand and perpetually miscalculate. The alliance of Sahel states is not fundamentally a Russian project that can be disrupted by attacking Russian interests. It is an African project driven by African interests and African leadership. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have chosen sovereignty over servitude. They have chosen resource control over resource extraction. They have chosen African leadership over Western hegemony and neo-colonial control. And no amount of Ukrainian sabotage, no volume of Western information warfare, no scale of narrative manipulation, no degree of Nigerian pressure can reverse this historical tide. The tanker that burned off Senegal's coast will be replaced by other shipments through other routes. The atrocity allegations dominating Western media will be systematically countered with evidence and documentation. The siege and blockade narratives about Mali's imminent collapse will be proven false and will continue being proven false every single day. Because beneath all this coordinated noise, beneath all the information warfare and proxy operations and diplomatic pressure, there is a fundamental, irreversible shift happening across Africa. The old colonial order is collapsing, regardless of how desperately it fights to maintain itself. The neo-colonial frameworks that sustained Western resource extraction and political domination for decades are cracking under the weight of their own contradictions and African resistance. And the alliance of Sahel states, along with the broader emerging African axis that includes Russia, China, and indigenous Pan-African leadership, they represent the future that is being born right now, regardless of Western sabotage. The deployment of Ukraine as a tool of sabotage against Mali is not a sign of Western strength or French strategic depth. It is a sign of absolute desperation. It is the last thrashing of a dying system, a final frantic attempt to reassert influence over a continent that has collectively decided to chart its own independent course. Even if Nigeria chooses to host additional French military bases, even if ECOWAS fragments further, it cannot stop the momentum of Pan-African unity and sovereignty movements. Ukraine may successfully strike 4 more tankers, but it cannot reverse the fundamental geopolitical realignment currently transforming the continent. Western media may flood the region with coordinated allegations and apocalyptic warnings, but it cannot convince African governments to abandon partnerships that demonstrably serve their national interests better than Western arrangements ever did. The real battle in the Sahel is not between Ukraine and Russia. It is not even between France and Mali. The real battle is between colonialism and sovereignty, between extraction and development, between the dying world order and the new African century being born right now before our eyes, despite every obstacle being thrown in its path. And in this battle, despite all the French proxies, despite all the Western weapons and narratives and institutional manipulation, the alliance of Sahel states will prevail. Africa will prevail. Not because Africa is perfect or without challenges, but because Africa has fundamentally decided to own its own future and chart its own path forward regardless of who objects. Now, if you've watched to this point, this is Frontline Africa, where we analyze geopolitics from Africa's perspective, from African interests and African sovereignty. Last week, following the developments in Benin Republic and the regional fallout, most of us focused all our attention on those matters. But while those events were dominating headlines, Ukraine was systematically executing sabotage operations in the Sahel, targeting Russian assets, amplifying disinformation campaigns through coordinated Western media. This is the actual situation on the ground right now. It's not just jihadist groups and their Ukrainian proxies attempting and failing to blockade Mali from accessing fuel to power its economy. They're now pivoting to more dangerous kinetic territory, and France is doubling down by weaponizing Nigeria along the coast as a containment strategy. But I believe they will ultimately fail because sovereignty is a legitimate cause. Independence is a legitimate right for every country to pursue and for Africa to achieve collectively. Even if it's only the alliance of Sahel states that gets it right initially, there will be hope and momentum for the future of this entire continent. That's why we cannot stop analyzing these developments, why we cannot stop talking about African sovereignty. Go to the comment section and tell us what you think about these new escalations. And if you want to continue seeing content that prioritizes African perspectives on African issues, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. I'm still your host, Ezeka, and I'll see you in the next one. It's goodbye for now.